Imagine breaking your arm. Right. You head into the clinic, and you're sitting there waiting for the x-ray.
Not exactly a fun afternoon.
No, definitely not. But usually there's a comforting precision to it. You look at that illuminated screen, the doctor points to a jagged white line on your radius bone, and, well, you have your answer.
Right. It's a clean, binary reality. It's either broken or it's not broken.
Exactly. It's a system that relies on visible, easily categorized baselines.
Yeah, because we want the diagnostic machine to show us exactly where the fracture is. That way we can, slab a cast on it, consult the healing calendar and say, okay, 6 weeks, and you're back to normal.
Right. But think about what happens when you step up to that x-ray machine, and instead of a clean black and white image, the screen just starts spitting out chaotic static.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Suddenly the machine itself is broken. You aren't dealing with a clean diagnostic landscape anymore. You're operating completely in the dark.
Forced to react to the pain without an actual map.
Exactly. And looking at the massive stack of intelligence sources we are diving into today, this is dated Friday, May 29th, 2026. That feeling of looking at a broken diagnostic machine is exactly what we are seeing play out across the globe.
It really is. I mean, we are looking at a world that is just rapidly losing its clean binary categories.
Yeah, and the through line in today's sources is undeniable. We are calling it the friction of transition.
The friction of transition. I like that because we're seeing massive entrenched systems from global military postures to local mountain ecosystems being forced to pivot abruptly.
Right.
And what we are really examining today is how human beings,
Yeah.
how local communities and global markets are adapting in real time. Because our traditional calendars, our expectations, and our baselines are simply collapsing.
We have a staggering array of data in front of us for this deep dive. We're pulling from international wire reports on Middle Eastern conflicts, national judicial rulings from the highest court, and highly granular Colorado infrastructure report.
It's a heavy stack today.
It is. But before we tear into the mechanics of this global and local whiplash, I need to make a very clear, explicit note for you about the intelligence we're analyzing today.
Yeah, this is important, right?
The national sources we're looking at contain some deeply polarized developments. We are examining directives from the Trump administration, heavily divided rulings from the Supreme Court, and intensely volatile foreign policy in the Middle East.
And we really need to be explicit with you here. We are not taking any political sides at all.
None.
We aren't here to play political referee. We aren't endorsing a left-wing perspective, and we aren't validating a right-wing perspective.
Exactly. Our sole directive for this deep dive is to impartially strip these events down to their studs. We are looking strictly at the factual reporting and the underlying ideas contained in the source material. We just want to figure out how these gears are turning.
We're looking at the physics of the geopolitics, not advocating for a team.
Exactly. So let's start by looking at a situation where the geopolitical physics are currently experiencing extreme whiplash.
The Middle East.
Yeah. Based on the wire reports from Thursday, May 28th, U.S. and Iranian negotiators reached a tentative 60-day agreement.
Which, on paper, extends an active ceasefire and supposedly launches formal negotiations regarding Iran's nuclear program.
Supposedly right, because I really have to push back on the framing of this as diplomatic progress.
Yeah, it's a stretch.
I mean, a 60-day ceasefire after the week we just had, it feels less like a peace treaty and more like two exhausted fighters just leaning against the ropes to catch their breath.
You really cannot look at this 60-day agreement in isolation. You just can't. You have to look at the staggering violence of the preceding 72 hours to understand what the ceasefire actually represents.
Right, because this was not a slow, calculated build-up to a polite handshake in Geneva.
Not at all. The negotiations happened in the direct shadow of active munitions.
Absolute chaos. According to the timelines in our sources, this all kicked off overnight on Monday, May 25. U.S. forces actively shot down Iranian drones near the Strait of Hormuz.
But it didn't stop there.
No. The U.S. military followed that up with what they explicitly termed self-defense strikes. And these were against targets along the Iranian coast.
And predictably, Iran's Revolutionary Guard didn't just absorb that. They retaliated directly against the specific American base where those strikes originate.
And then it spilled over the immediate borders.
Yeah. By late Wednesday, Kuwait was dragged into the fray.
Wait, Kuwait had to actively intercept missiles, right?
Yes. They intercepted a volley of Iranian missiles. And the U.S. military command labeled that specific missile strike toward Kuwait as an egregious violation.
I mean, when you're looking at missile intercepts over neighboring sovereign nations, you are looking at a regional conflict that is milliseconds away from becoming a multi-front war.
Exactly. So we go from active coastal strikes and mid-air missile intercepts on Wednesday straight into a signed 60-day diplomatic ceasefire on Thursday.
It's whiplash. To me, this is like watching a high-speed multi-car collision on the interstate suddenly freeze, and the drivers just calmly step out to exchange insurance information.
That's a great way to put it.
How on earth do global systems like the financial markets, the energy sector, the shipping industry, how do they even process that kind of instantaneous pivot?
Well, they process it with extreme panic, mostly because of the geography involved here. We really have to talk about the Strait of Hormuz.
Right.
This is arguably the most critical maritime choke point on the planet. It's this narrow strip of water separating the Persian Gulf from the Gulf of Oman and the Arabian Sea.
And it's incredibly narrow, isn't it?
Very. At its narrowest point, the shipping lanes are only a couple of miles wide, and roughly a fifth of the world's total daily oil consumption passes through that specific corridor.
A fifth, which means it is the literal jugular vein of the global energy supply.
Exactly. So when you have military drones being shot down and coastal artillery firing in that exact geographic bottleneck, the global energy markets don't wait for a formal declaration of war to react.
Right, they panic immediately.
The shipping companies instantly recognize that the risk of a total blockade is non-zero. So insurance premiums for ultra-large crude carriers spike astronomically overnight,
Because the physical flow of oil is threatened.
which immediately prices fear into the global markets.
And we are seeing that fear translate directly to the consumer level instantly, aren't we? The sources detail a cabinet meeting on Wednesday where President Trump addressed the spiking gas prices.
Yeah, the rising cost of living being driven by the instability in the strait.
And his rhetoric wasn't exactly calming the waters. While he acknowledged the diplomatic track, he warned that the U.S. might have to, quote, finish the job if they aren't satisfied with the outcome.
Which is the critical phrase, right? Finish the job. When you have that kind of language hanging over a freshly inked agreement, it changes the entire nature of the document.
Completely.
If we look at the mechanics of this, I would argue this 60-day window isn't a resolution at all. It is a geopolitical margin call.
A margin call. Okay, unpack that for me.
So in finance, a margin call happens when an investor is over-leveraged in a highly volatile market, and the broker demands they pump in more cash or risk total liquidation.
Okay.
In this geopolitical context, both sides were accelerating toward total regional conflict, a complete liquidation of the status quo that neither economy could likely sustain right now.
Right.
So the 60-day ceasefire is the margin call. It's a temporary halt to trading. It acts as a highly pressurized relief valve that allows the crude carriers to move and the markets to take a single ragged breath.
But the underlying debt remains.
Exactly. The core conflict regarding the nuclear program and the aggressive regional posturing it remains entirely unpaid and unresolved.
It's just a pause button on a machine that is still wired to explode.
Yep.
But here is where the executive administration's information strategy becomes truly fascinating to me.
Yeah.
They are juggling this incredibly volatile, high-stakes margin call in the Middle East. They're dealing with spiking gas prices and military intercepts. And then right in the middle of this week, they drop an entirely different, totally unexpected narrative onto the public radar.
Oh, the unidentified aerial phenomena file.
Yes, the UFOs.
Nah.
The sources note that during a White House event, which was specifically meant to celebrate NASA astronauts, President Trump abruptly announced that the Pentagon is preparing to release very interesting UFO and UAP files.
It's wild timing.
It really is. Now, I know the sources point out this builds on a directive from February to increase transparency around extraterrestrial records, but the timing of this announcement is what stops me in my tracks.
The timing is everything here.
You are in a week where you are authorizing coastal strikes, neighboring countries are shooting down missiles, and global oil markets are panicking, and you use a NASA photo op to announce the impending release of UFO files.
Yeah.
If you are managing a crisis, why would you deliberately introduce something that sounds like science fiction into the news cycle right at that exact moment?
Because modern executive administrations do not view information as a sequential timeline. They view it as a fluid, simultaneous battlefield.
Okay, that makes sense.
When we talk about the friction of transition, part of what citizens are experiencing right now is the collapse of the traditional media narrative. Historically, a major international conflict would consume 100% of the executive branch's public-facing bandwidth.
Right. The White House press room would be singularly focused on the Persian Gulf, a single dominant storyline.
Yes. But what this UAP announcement demonstrates is a highly sophisticated, if somewhat chaotic, method of narrative management.
How so?
Well, by introducing the impending release of extraterrestrial or unidentified aerial phenomena records right at the peak of international anxiety, The administration effectively fractures the public's attention.
Ah, I see.
It highlights the executive branch's power to abruptly shift the media focus and manage the flow of information on their own highly unpredictable calendar. You are literally forcing the public to look at the stars while the oceans are boiling.
That is the ultimate flex of narrative control. You really cannot predict the headline from 1 hour to the next.
No, you can't.
But this breakneck, highly reactive speed of the executive branch and the military creates a massive contrast when you look at another branch of government.
The courts.
Exactly. While the military is shooting down drones in seconds and the executive is shifting narratives in minutes, the judiciary is operating on an entirely different temporal plane.
We are moving from the speed of sound to the speed of institutional law.
Let's look at the Supreme Court ruling and the sources regarding Terry Pitchford. The Supreme Court just issued a decision in favor of this Mississippi death row inmate.
Right.
And the core of this ruling specifically found racial bias in the selection of the jury that originally convicted him.
And we really need to pause on the mechanics of that ruling, because the Supreme Court doesn't react to the daily news cycle.
Not at all.
A case like Terry Pitchford's requires years, sometimes decades, to navigate the appellate circuits before it reaches the highest court. Yeah. They are examining the granular mechanics of jury selection. They're likely scrutinizing peremptory strikes to determine if prosecutors systematically excluded jurors based on race.
Which violates the Constitution under the Batson precedent.
Exactly. It is a microscopic, incredibly slow legal dissection.
But what really stands out in the sources is the vote count on this. It was a 5-4 ruling.
A razor-thin margin on a matter of literal life and death.
And think about the profound friction that creates for the everyday citizen. Put these three macro-level events side by side.
Okay.
We have a global ceasefire negotiated overnight to stop missiles. We have a sudden, unpredictable presidential announcement about UFO files designed to dominate the afternoon news cycle.
Right.
And simultaneously, we have a slow, methodical Supreme Court ruling decided by a single judge's interpretation that fundamentally redefines systemic justice and racial bias in the courtroom.
It perfectly illustrates why the current era feels so destabilizing for people. The global and executive systems are moving at breakneck reactionary speeds.
Yeah.
They are purely responding to the moment.
Yeah.
But the judicial branch, the bedrock of our civil rights, is making glacial, deeply consequential, and highly divided rulings. The friction occurs because we as a society have to live under all of these distinct timelines simultaneously.
You are watching the sky for drones and UAPs today, but you are waiting a decade for a court to define your fundamental rights by a single vote. That is a staggering amount of systemic friction to process.
It is. And the natural question for you, the listener, is how does all of this macro-level volatility, this collapse of predictable timelines at the national and international level, how does it trickle down to the literal ground beneath our feet?
Right. How does a shifting calendar impact the concrete, the soil, and the budgets of a local community?
Which brings us to the ground level. We're transitioning our focus from the Strait of Hormuz directly into the Rocky Mountains.
We are looking at a stack of highly localized Colorado infrastructure and policy reports. And man, if you think the geopolitical timelines are chaotic, wait until you see what is happening to the state's physical infrastructure.
Let's dig into the Colorado Department of Transportation's updated 10-year statewide plan.
CDOT.
Yes, CDOT.
So CDOT just approved this massive $300 million funding blueprint specifically earmarked for the Northwest region. The goal is to fund major upgrades along the Interstate 70 mountain corridor and the critical surrounding arterial roads.
Right.
Now, on the surface, a 10-year plan sounds like a return to that comfortable, predictable calendar we talked about earlier.
It does. I mean, on paper, a 10-year plan implies stability. It implies you know exactly what the environment will look like a decade from now.
But the reality on the ground, as detailed in these traffic and engineering reports, tells a completely different story.
Oh, absolutely.
This isn't about smoothly laying down fresh asphalt on a sunny afternoon. The sources paint a picture of a highway system that is essentially fighting a losing battle against the mountain it sits on.
Let's look at the specific mile markers they're citing.
It is so crucial to ground this in the physical reality of the corridor.
Okay, so right now, on Vail Pass, which covers mile points 180 to 190, the left lane is completely closed in both directions for active, heavy construction.
Yep.
They have implemented a strict 12-foot width restriction for vehicles that remains active all the way through November 8. They have wet pavement caution advisories actively flashing. They are trying to execute everything from auxiliary lane additions to massive wildlife underpasses.
And if you drive further west into Glenwood Canyon, that's my points 116 to 132. The engineering constraints become almost incomprehensible. The sources note that Glenwood Canyon is currently operating at only 50% capacity.
Half the highway is gone.
Exactly, half of it. And the
Yeah.
reason why is critical: major bridge joint reconstruction.
Okay, explain that. Well, Glenwood Canyon is an engineering marvel, but it is built into the side of a sheer limestone and shale cliff face. The highway is essentially a series of suspended bridges.
Wow.
So the extreme temperature fluctuations at high altitude cause the concrete to expand and contract violently. Over time, that thermal stress literally rips the bridge joints apart.
That sounds terrifying.
It's a huge issue. To fix them, you have to squeeze massive, heavy machinery onto a cliff-edge highway while maintaining traffic flow. And on top of that, they have high runoff monitoring actively engaged for the recreation path below.
Wait, high runoff monitoring?
Yeah, they are constantly watching the river levels to ensure the entire lower foundation doesn't just wash out.
It's an absolute logistical nightmare. And you have to factor in the weather, which refuses to adhere to any standard calendar.
Right.
The sources explicitly state that the Colorado Passenger Vehicle Traction Law, known locally as Code 15, remains in full effect through May 31. And that's for the massive high-altitude segment extending from Dotsero all the way to Morrison.
That is over 100 miles of highway where the state is legally mandating winter driving equipment on the verge of June.
In June. And let's clarify exactly what Code 15 demands, because it isn't just a suggestion. It legally requires all passenger vehicles to be equipped with either four-wheel drive, all-wheel drive, or tires bearing a dedicated winter rating.
Like a mountain snowflake icon.
Exactly, with a strict minimum tread depth of 3/16 of an inch. If you get caught in a storm without that specific molecular grip on your tires and you cause an accident, you are heavily fined.
So synthesize this picture for a second. You have half the capacity gone in a narrow canyon due to failing bridge joints. You have left lanes closed on the major mountain passes.
Yeah.
You have state troopers enforcing winter tire tread depths in late May. And on top of this utterly chaotic, highly volatile physical reality, the state is trying to overlay a rigid 10-year, $300 million master plan.
It feels completely contradictory. I mean, how can you confidently plan 10 years out when you don't even know if the bridge joints will survive the current thermal expansion this week?
That is the friction. The state is pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into concrete and steel to fight against increasingly unpredictable weather patterns and geological realities.
Yeah.
They are desperately trying to engineer long-term stability in an environment that is currently defined by extreme daily volatility. It is a monumental battle of attrition between human infrastructure and shifting geology.
And that profound disconnect between state-level planning and sudden ground-level reality isn't just happening with bridge joints and asphalt.
No, it's not.
It is happening with municipal budgets and classrooms, too. Let's shift our focus to the Colorado School Finance Act.
This is a perfect example of policy whiplash.
Governor Jared Polis just signed the School Finance Act into law. Now, the headline that gets pushed to the press is largely positive for the state as a whole. The legislation successfully avoids overall catastrophic cuts to Colorado's K-12 public schools.
Right. It keeps the macro-level budget intact.
But the macro-level headline rarely reflects the micro-level reality.
Exactly. When you dig into the details and the sources, you find a massive caveat. There were last-minute funding adjustments made to the state formulas.
Last-minute adjustments.
Yep. Because of these 11th-hour shifts, several Western Slope school districts are suddenly going to receive significantly smaller funding increases than they originally anticipated and budgeted for.
The financial rug is pulled out at the very last second.
Completely pulled out.
I have to ask you to unpack the mechanics of this, because I think people hear funding adjustment and their eyes just glaze over.
Sure.
But what does it actually feel like on the ground for a local municipality? When a local school superintendent or a town planner has their state funding formula shifted overnight, what actually happens inside that community the next morning?
It creates a state of perpetual, exhausting defense. Think about how municipal budgeting actually works, right? A local school district spends 6 to 8 months mapping out their upcoming academic calendar. They use property tax projections and promise state backfill numbers to make hard commitments. They negotiate union contracts for teacher salaries. They hire special education paraprofessionals. They sign contracts for facility maintenance and bus routing.
And those are legally binding, right?
Yes. All of these are fixed legal commitments based on a promised state baseline.
A baseline they believed was secure.
Right. But when the state legislature tweaks the formula at the 11th hour to balance the macro budget, those promised funds just vanish.
Wow.
The local district is instantly thrown into crisis mode. They have to literally tear up their academic calendar and rewrite their budget over a weekend.
Just scrambling.
Suddenly, the superintendent is scrambling to figure out if they have to freeze hiring, delay roof repairs, or cut art programs just to meet their basic payroll obligations. The macro-level state politics directly and violently destabilizes the micro-level classroom reality.
So once again, the predictable calendar collapses and the local community is forced into a state of immediate real-time reaction. They can't plan, they can only respond.
Exactly.
And nowhere in our stack of sources is that desperate need for immediate life or death reaction more apparent than when we look at the environmental intelligence.
This is arguably the most urgent, alarming data point in our entire deep dive today.
It really is. The sources highlight a profoundly stark warning regarding the immediate threat of summer wildfires. They feature a direct, harrowing account from a woman named Jessica Ron, who is a survivor of the devastating East Troublesome Fire.
Her story is intense.
She shared her experience of having to evacuate her home with a newborn child as the fire rapidly approached. And her message to current residents is completely devoid of sugarcoating. She warns that fleeing a fast-moving fire, quote, will feel like chaos.
Chaos is the operative word.
She is urgently stressing that residents cannot wait for the smoke to appear. She's demanding they prepare evacuation bags, secure pet supplies, physically map out alternate escape routes, and organize emergency files right now, well ahead of the active fire cycles.
But we need to explain why her warning is being amplified by the authorities with such terrifying urgency right now. Like, why is the threat level so severe this specific summer?
Okay, break that down for us.
To understand the urgency, you have to look at the deeply disturbing hydrological data coming out of the local mountain environment. It all comes down to the snowpack.
The SNOTEL data.
Yes.
Right.
The SNOTEL network, which stands for Snow Telemetry, is a system of remote monitoring stations that measure the snow water equivalent, or SWE, in the high country.
Okay.
It basically tells us exactly how much actual water is locked in the snow. And the late April SNOTEL assessments for multiple local mountain basins revealed something unprecedented. They were sitting at a 0th percentile for their snowpack baseline.
A 0th percentile, not
Yeah.
the 10th, not the 1st, the 0th. That means 0, right?
It is a statistically staggering number.
Yeah.
It effectively means that the foundational water storage for the entire region, the slow-melting snowpack that keeps the forest moist and feeds the rivers through August, simply vanished months ahead of schedule.
The environmental calendar didn't just shift, it collapsed entirely. The baseline is literally 0.
0.
Okay, but I have to play devil's advocate here, or at least look closely at the immediate weather reports in our sources. Because the forecasts are explicitly talking about an unsettled weather pattern currently hitting the high country corridors.
Right, the spring storms.
They mention high-altitude thermal fluctuations, convective thunderstorms, and the arrival of heavy spring wet snow. If I am looking out my window in late May and I see an inch of rain or heavy snow falling on my deck, it is very hard for me to believe we are at a 0th percentile drought. Doesn't that late spring precipitation fix the problem?
That is precisely the dangerous illusion of spring storms. And the environmental reports are very careful to address it. They note that these recent low-pressure systems are delivering what locals call concrete snow.
Concrete snow.
Yeah, it's highly dense, very wet snow.
Which sounds like a good thing, right? More water.
It sounds good, but you have to look at the thermodynamics of how the soil actually absorbs moisture. A 0th percentile winter creates a massive structural deficit deep within the soil profile.
Okay, meaning what?
The ground becomes essentially hydrophobic. It's so baked and dry that it literally repels water. When you drop heavy concrete snow or a fast convective thunderstorm on top of that, it acts merely as temporary surface mitigation.
Ah, I see.
The moisture sits on top, the sun comes out, the temperatures spike, and that surface water evaporates rapidly into the dry alpine air before it can penetrate deep into the root systems of the timber.
Wow. It's like taking a massive bone-dry campfire pit that has been baking in the sun for a week and throwing a single soaking wet paper towel over the top of the logs.
That's a perfect analogy.
On the very surface, for a brief moment, it looks wet and maybe even safe. But the underlying fuel, the deep structure of the wood beneath that paper towel, is completely parched.
Yep.
The second the paper towel dries up, the entire pit is ready to ignite with a single spark.
That is the exact mechanism at play. The deep fuel is fundamentally parched. And this structural deficit is exactly why the utility providers in the Colorado mountains are being forced to make radical, unprecedented infrastructural decisions.
Like what?
The sources note that local power companies are actively preparing to implement proactive public safety power shutoffs this summer.
Meaning they will deliberately shut off the electrical grid to entire towns.
Yes. If the snow-to-tell data is at 0, the fields are bone dry, and a high wind event rolls in, the risk of a single tree branch falling onto an active power line and sparking a catastrophic inferno is simply too high.
It's too dangerous to leave the power on.
Exactly. So the utility companies will preemptively pull the plug. They will cut power to homes, businesses, traffic lights, and medical equipment just to prevent a fire.
That is the ultimate friction of transition. The natural environmental calendar completely broke, so the human infrastructure has to adopt extreme, highly punitive measures just to prevent total disaster.
Exactly. When the natural baseline disappears, the human systems have to overcompensate aggressively.
Which takes us right into the final phase of our deep dive today. We've looked at the breakdown of global diplomacy, the friction of judicial rulings, the physical strain on the highways, and the collapse of the snowpack.
It's a lot to process.
The ultimate question for you listening is, how do human beings actually adapt? How do you live, work, and build a community in a valley where the snowpack is gone, the main interstate is under construction, and the power grid might deliberately shut off on a windy Tuesday?
Well, you adapt by fundamentally rewriting the social contract. And often, that happens through strict communal enforcement.
Let's look at the Eagle River Water and Sanitation District. According to the local policy reports, the district board just approved a strict new water watchdog program.
Right.
And crucially, they have significantly escalated the penalties for outdoor water use violations.
This is where abstract policy transitions into stark physical reality.
Under this newly approved system, if a property receives 4 violations for improper outdoor water use within a single year, the district will not just fine them.
No, the fines weren't working.
They will send a technician to literally install a physical water flow restricting device directly onto the property's main water line.
It's a profound escalation, a flow restrictor. And to understand why a local board would take such a drastic step, you have to look at the intersection of wealth, resources, and geography in these specific communities.
Because these are premium resort towns.
Exactly. For decades, water conservation in these areas was handled through polite, voluntary suggestions.
The classic hotel placard asking you to reuse your towel, or the nice flyer in the mail asking you to water your lawn every other day.
Exactly, voluntary conservation. But a 0th percentile snowpack completely obliterates the effectiveness of voluntary compliance. You can't just ask nicely anymore.
No.
The sources connect this aggressive new policy to the Live Like a Local campaign and the heavy push for what is called Coloradoscape.
Coloradoscape, meaning the active removal of thirsty traditional green turf lawns in favor of native drought-resistant vegetation.
Right. Because the chemistry of evapotranspiration in an alpine desert is brutal. The data shows that roughly 75% of the purified drinking water used outdoors on traditional lawns is simply lost.
75%.
Yes. It evaporates into the dry air or is absorbed beyond the root zone without benefiting the local watershed at all.
So it's just wasted.
Wasted. When your primary water storage, the snowpack, is sitting at 0, pumping thousands of gallons of treated drinking water onto a decorative patch of Kentucky bluegrass becomes an existential threat to the community's survival.
I have to emphasize how fascinating this sociological shift is. In ultra-wealthy resort communities, there's often an underlying assumption that resources are a guaranteed luxury,
Oh, for sure.
If you have the money, you just assume you can buy an infinite amount of water to keep your massive lawn green. But this flow restrictor policy shatters that assumption. Water has fundamentally transitioned from a purchasable luxury into a strictly audited, fiercely protected communal asset.
It forces a collective reality on an individualized society.
Exactly. Your neighbor's decision to water their green lawn in the middle of the afternoon is no longer viewed as a private landscaping choice. It is now viewed as a direct, measurable threat to the town's drinking water supply and the fire department's suppression reserves.
It's a public safety issue now.
The community has realized that if they don't physically enforce the rules, the reservoir will run dry.
Yeah.
So they have moved past asking nicely. If you violate the communal baseline, they will physically throttle the water entering your multi-million-dollar home until it is just a trickle.
The environmental baseline collapsed, so the social contract had to be rewritten with cold, mechanical enforcement. It is the only way a community can survive the friction of transition.
Which brings us to the final piece of our puzzle today, and the people who are going to inherit this newly rewritten, highly pressurized social contract. Let's talk about the Vail Mountain School graduation.
The class of 2026.
The sources cover the recent commencement ceremony for the Vail Mountain School, and the rhetoric used during the celebrations is incredibly telling. The valedictorians and guest speakers didn't just offer standard platitudes about following your dreams.
No, it was much heavier than that.
They issued a very specific, hard-hitting challenge to the new graduates. They told them they must, quote, refuse the comfort of complacency, explicitly noting that they are entering what they described as a deeply fragmented world.
It is a striking phrase.
Mm-hmm.
A deeply fragmented world. And if we synthesize everything we have analyzed over the course of this deep dive, those graduation speeches are incredibly poignant. They serve as the absolute perfect summary of the reality we've been unpacking.
They really do. Think about the exact world these local high school graduates are inheriting the moment they walk off that stage, diploma in hand. They are stepping directly into the reality of the broken X-ray machine we talked about at the beginning.
They are inheriting the friction.
Exactly. They are inheriting a geopolitical landscape so fractured and volatile that a monumental international ceasefire might only be guaranteed to last 60 days before the missiles fly again.
A 60-day margin call.
They are inheriting an executive branch that manages crises by abruptly deploying completely unpredictable narratives like UFO files. They are inheriting a legal system shaped by deeply divided, razor-thin Supreme Court rulings that alter their fundamental rights.
And locally, the inheritance is even starker.
They're inheriting an environmental reality defined by statistically unprecedented 0th percentile snowpacks. They are stepping into a world where extreme wildfire threats mandate sudden power grid shutoffs.
Where the main interstate is fundamentally crippled by thermal expansion.
And where basic natural resources like water are regulated by physical flow restrictors installed by the government.
The comfortable, predictable calendars that their parents and grandparents might have relied upon, the idea that winter brings snow, summer brings rain, the highway stays open, and global treaties last for decades. Those calendars are entirely obsolete for the class of 2026.
So as we look at this massive stack of intelligence, I have to ask you, the listener, directly, are we asking too much of this next generation? Is it inherently unfair to hand them a world that requires constant, high-stress adaptation just to keep the lights on and the water flowing?
That's a heavy burden.
Or, and this is the flip side, is this high-pressure crucible exactly the kind of environment that builds the extreme, unbreakable resilience needed to survive the future? Think about it. If you grow up knowing that the snowpack might fail, the highway might crumble, and the global markets might panic on any given Tuesday, are you inherently better equipped to navigate a fragmented world than someone who grew up expecting stability?
It is a profound, incredibly difficult question. And honestly, it brings me to a final, lingering thought that builds on every single layer we've explored today.
Okay, let's hear it.
We have spent this entire deep dive examining the wreckage of broken expectations.
Well, I have.
We've dissected global ceasefires that act merely as 60-day margin calls. We've analyzed how the highest courts operate on a completely different temporal plane than the executive branch.
Right.
We've seen local school budgets ripped up overnight, structural highway plans attempting to pave over shifting geology, and utility companies physically shutting down the grid because the foundational snowpack simply ceased to exist.
It is the total collapse of the predictable schedule.
Exactly. So if our environmental, our political, and our infrastructural calendars are genuinely and permanently obsolete, maybe the problem is that we are still trying to use them.
What do you mean?
Should we simply stop trying to get back to normal schedules? We keep treating these events as anomalies that need to be fixed so we can return to the baseline. But what if the baseline is gone?
Wow.
What if the future of human resilience isn't about creating better 10-year master plans that just get destroyed by a single dry winter?
What's that?
What if true resilience is about fundamentally designing our lives, our legal frameworks, and our cities around a state of permanent real-time reaction?
Designing for permanent reaction instead of waiting around for the diagnostic X-ray machine to be fixed. That is a deeply provocative, paradigm-shifting thought to end on. You don't build a rigid bridge, you build a bridge that is designed to flex when the canyon moves.
Exactly.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. It has been an intense, complex, and deeply fascinating journey through a massive stack of systemic friction. Keep questioning the world around you, keep looking for those hidden through lines in the static, and we look forward to unpacking the next stack of sources with you soon.